All right, for more perspective on the roadmap of the GST, we're now joined by Rajeev Dimri of BMR Advisors from Delhi. Also joining us, Harishanker Subramaniam of Ernst & Young, and our very own Siddharth Zarabi. Siddharth, in fact, you go first. Take us through the key takeaways from that GST discussion paper.
In fact, Harsha, if I can take away through some of the points which I don't think have come out very clearly so far. This on the exemptions part, I'm going to read this line. Any new exemptions, remissions or continuations of earlier exemptions would not be allowed. In such cases, the centre and state governments can provide reimbursement after collecting GST. So a very, very definitive indication as to what happens to all the exemptions that are provided on the indirect tax side to various states on account of backward and such details. The second takeaway, and we are trying to get more sense on this, is the what happens with regard to certain states wanting to change rates subsequently after a rate and a date has been adopted. Remember, the rate and date is not clear from this draft, and clearly in that the draft is perhaps providing us some hints, and I'm just going to read. It says an appropriate mechanism that will be binding on both the centre and states would be worked out, and needs for any further modification, if necessary, will be collectively agreed through a constitutional amendment. So clearly two big points with regard to the finer points and very key points of this this first draft discussion paper. But remember, the basic question, the rate and the date, still not clear at this point of time. Harsha?
Well, that's right, Siddharth. We have been speaking to India Inc. and we'll get to those reactions in just a bit. But Harishankar Subramaniam, let me start by asking you, we've been joking about this in office, that the rate and date, the most critical pieces of information, have been silent as far as this white paper is concerned. But nevertheless, a very, very big positive, because there was concern on whether this draft paper would actually meet the 10th November dateline. So in that sense, a positive signal going out to industry, to global investors, that the GST roadmap is something tangible that the government is working with.
Yeah, Shireen, the first and foremost is the need for an official document from the government was very important. And one of the key stakeholders, which is the Empowered Committee, has brought out this first discussion paper, at least officially stating what the contours of GST will be. Soundbites we've been hearing for a long time. But first and foremost, they have brought out an official contour. It will be a dual GST. There could be possible multiple rates. They have mentioned about how the administration will work. They are talking about what taxes and duties, both at the centre and state, will be subsumed. So some degree of clarity. They've also spoken about some of the sectors which will remain outside GST.
Right. Are you surprised, though, that tobacco has finally been included under the GST? Because expectation was that it wasn't going to be.
Well, tobacco, the expectations was that it might still remain out of GST like it's in the current scenario, but tobacco is into GST. Alcohol and petrol, we all knew would be outside GST, so that's an addition that's come into the GST now.
October 1st, the realistic timeline, because no timeline as of now as far as the white paper is concerned. April 1st, nobody's working with that timeline anymore. The most realistic timeline, October 1?
April 1st is something which we all knew would not be feasible. October 1st looks to be a likely timeline, but even for that, we need to really get all the things working in the same direction, whether it's a constitutional amendment, whether it's drafting of legislation. But October 1st could be a realistic timeline that we can look at.
Okay. Harsha?
Rajeev, if you talk about October as a realistic timeline, to your mind, what are the operational challenges? Is it the political challenge? Is it the administrative challenge that could be stumbling blocks? And from what you've seen in the white paper, are all your concerns been allayed?
Well, as a first step, I would see that the political buy-in for the introduction of GST is already there with what has happened today. Of course, a lot of ground has to be covered before GST can be effectively introduced. But I would say that today a good beginning has been made. It's an official statement. A lot of things were already in public domain in terms of bits and pieces of information. But for all those, the Empowered Committee and the Finance Minister to be on the same platform and issuing a document, I think that's a good way to start. So I would say that the political buy-in to the process has already happened. Yes, a lot of administrative stuff has to happen, details of the law, the rules, the procedures, the form, and a fair bit of time has to be made available to the industry to move to this new environment. And therefore, a lot of work has to happen before now. And whatever is the intended date of GST introduction, whether it's October 1, July 1, or any other date, a lot of work still needs to happen. But it's a good beginning today.
Harishanker, do you believe that this discussion paper at least addresses the concern of uncertainty that companies normally deal with when it comes to indirect taxation policy in this country? Or do you think, that's still open to debate? Any finance minister 2 years from now could come and change and overhaul the systems and change the rules of the game once again?
See, the first and foremost need of GST was to create a common market in India. In the past, most of the states or most of the tax regimes in India has been based on a tax arbitrage across goods. So hopefully this GST should have a common legislation, a common classification for goods, and also ensure that the rates are across the states on the same level. I hope, unlike VAT, 4 years since VAT or 5 years since VAT has been introduced, you've seen some states have upped the rates, have moved the goods from various rates. I hope that doesn't happen in the current GST regime. Like Siddharth mentioned, there is a paragraph which speaks about it, but I still need to see more in fine print to see how this will be really happening at the state level.
All right, Siddharth, you want to come in?
Yeah, Shireen, in fact, one more point, and I think both our guests would probably want to respond, and this is the para about the need for compensation. Again, I'm going to read. It says it is difficult to estimate accurately as to how much the states will gain from service taxes and how much they will lose on account of removal of cascading effect, payment of input tax credit, and the phase out of the CST. I wonder if Harishankar or Rajeev has some sense of the compensation, because this document then goes to talk about the fact that this compensation will be given out as per recommendations of the 13th Finance Commission over 5 years. And this is a question that I had put to Mr. Ashwin Das Gupta, didn't get a clear answer, but maybe they could respond to it.
Harry, you want to start?
Difficult to estimate, because I really don't know. See, the states are aware of goods because they have been under the VAT regime for a long time. You can come to some view about what could be the increase or loss in revenue on some empirical data basis. As far as services, since the pie is now also going to be shared by the states, what kind of an increase that would lead to is something which I really don't know whether there's such data exists. So it could be a very difficult guess to make as to what kind of compensation would that lead to.
Rajeev?
See, the same discussion had come about at the time when VAT was being introduced, and the same concerns of the state that, will they lose on account of introduction of VAT. And the biggest problem in being able to come up with a realistic estimate up front was a lack of data based on which some modeling could be done to say what are the likely, scenario going forward. This time around, the difficulty is even greater because forget goods, we are not talking about services for which no data exists. So certainly this is not a small issue. From a state's perspective, it is a big issue because they're converting into an environment where there is no basis for them to say what would their expected revenue would look like. And therefore their fears and their concerns for a loss of compensation or a loss of revenue is fair. How that, we have already worked that as a country in the environment of VAT for the last 5 years. And as far as I am aware, and not that I have all the data, but it's not been a case where states have really lost on account of VAT introduction, and I hope this experience will be same as we move into a GST environment. But yes, there is no model that is available because of lack of data.
Okay. All right, very quickly, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to point out the red herrings as you've spotted them in the draft paper. Rajeev, let me start with you. Your top 3 red herrings that you managed to spot so far.
I mean, the whole movement of goods and services across states and multiple thresholds and how the whole mechanism that will work will be a big deal for any company that is doing business across states. I mean, that's when the details become available, that will be the first thing that I'll look for. The multiple threshold is another area that could get into difficulties. And the separate regime of IGST, while that is a good idea, it will all depend how it gets implemented, because those are the things that can cause anxiety and concerns for large taxpayers.
All right, Hari?
Since Rajeev seems to have covered the other red herrings, to me the red herring that industry will be concerned about is octroi not being subsumed within
Which has
GST.
been the big hope.
Which has been a big hope, and it doesn't find any mention in the document, so that still remains a red herring as far as I am concerned. There are many good points about subsuming the kind of taxes that they have mentioned, but to me octroi is a real cause of concern for many in the industry.
All right.
All right, we'll leave it there, gentlemen. Harishanker, Subramaniam, Rajeev Dimri, many thanks for joining us with that perspective.